This is the third of three lectures on Hajj Mahmud Kati's Tarikh al-fattash. It's part 3. This lecture will focus on the fall of the Songhay Dynasty. The first lecture was a more general discussion of the Tarikh. The second lecture focuses on the rise of the Songhay Dynasty of the Askiyas, the rise of the Askiya Muhammad to power. This one we're going to look at how the empire began to implode. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time reviewing basics of this text. So if you haven't seen the first 2 lectures, I suggest you go back to those, or at the very least, you want to have a look at a lecture entitled Sahelian Scripture, which deals with questions of differences between Western forms of literacy, Western scripture, Western writing, and West African forms of writing, Egypto-African, Northwest African forms of writing. This is and the manuscripts of Timbuktu from the medieval period, which this is one. So I'm not going to talk too much about those basic questions. We're going to go, because we've got a lot to cover, so we're going to go right into the close reading of the text itself. Now, the image that you see is from the palace of the Sadian Empire. This is the Sahelian conquest of the Songhay Dynasty. This was led by Suli Ahmed Mansour. I took this picture in Marrakesh, Morocco. This was the place from which the Pasha of Morocco, or Marrakesh, Suli Ahmed Mansour, was watching while the brothers or the sons of Askiya Musa, the grandsons of the Askiya Muhammad, and all brothers, a lot, because they both, Askiya Muhammad and Askiya Daoud, that is not Musa, the Askiya Daoud, they had a lot of children, a lot of sons, and in that generation, of the grandsons of the Askiya Muhammad, they began to fight one another for power, for sovereign leadership of the dynasty, and all the while they were not attentive to the fact that the Moroccans were waiting and watching, and so Suli Ahmed Mansour sent a troop of renegade soldiers. They were renegades because they were Christians who didn't go along with the Catholic conquest of Spain, came to Morocco and became mercenaries for Suli Ahmed Mansour, and he sent them down there. And as we're going to see, they weren't large. There were far more Songhai, but the Songhai didn't have the firepower of the Moroccans. They came with rifles, and the Songhai essentially fought with spears and bows and arrows. They had not bothered to acquire the new technology, and this was fatal for them, in addition to the fact that they were disputing among themselves as the sons of the Askiya were engaged in essentially what became a kind of a fratricidal conflict. So that's what we're going to look at, what exactly happened, and then we'll look at different views on why the dynasty imploded from different perspectives, or different authorities. Now, again, you can see there on the map, there's Marrakesh in Morocco in the north, and then down below in Mali, Timbuktu, and Gao is just a little ways from Timbuktu. So you can see it's a very difficult terrain to cross. It's foreboding, but the Moroccans braved the desert. They came down, and the Songhai did not know what was coming, but they were successfully able to invade Gao, to attack Timbuktu, and they killed the Askiya Ishaq, who was Askiya at that time, and that was the point at which the Songhay Dynasty became a vassal of the north. So it only lasted for 3 generations before it finally disappeared. And Kati was of the first generation, and he tells the story from his perspective. His ancestors, particularly Ibn al-Mukhtar, fill us in with the details of what happened later after Kati died. and he assembled the various manuscripts to put together what became known as the Tarikh al-fattash. Again, here's a map of what the dynasty, how much territory it covered. It was a vast dynasty, a lot of land, a lot to administer. And this was also one of the reasons for the eventual collapse of the empire. Was it just was such a vast expanse of territory. It's very hard to govern this much land for the Askiyas. At least in the later generations. Askiya Daud had a pretty easy time of it by all accounts. That was the era of great prosperity. Now, again, here's I won't go over this again, but here you can see the three different versions of it: the Arabic, French, and English. It is available in English from Africa World Press, and so I'm taking excerpts from the English language text so that you can, because this is obviously intended for Anglophone readers of the Tarikh. Now I'm going to start with, I want to make a reference to a film by Jean Rouch called Les Maîtres Fous, or the Mad Masters, which was made in 1955. This was by far Rouch's most controversial film. It remains very controversial. A lot of people really don't like this film, African and French alike, but you'll find it very easily on YouTube. And in spite of its controversial nature, I do think that it's a film worth watching because it does give us some insight into the phenomenon of trance possession. And Rouch was very interested in trance possession, and he filmed a lot of his films. Were the Songhai were the focus of a lot of his films. Now, he made films on the Masi, and then when Marcel Griol died, he made films on the Dogon and other groups as well. But he was particularly interested in Niger and in the Songhai people, and he was an ethnographer as well as a filmmaker. And this group, this film was made in Ghana, and these were members of the Hauka cult, which was a kind of an offshoot, a small break-off from the Songhai, of the Songhai people. So these were Songhai who had migrated to Ghana, Accra, and were working there, and then developed a certain kind of religious rituals that they practiced in secret, and then Rouch filmed them. Now you can see the man in this film, he was possessed, and for Rouch, remember, possession was not a negative. It was he was looking at it descriptively. He thought of himself as a filmmaker entering into scene trances, or that he too would become, as a filmmaker, a part of the possession ceremony. And but partly what occurred in this particular case, when people became possessed in this film, they frothed at the mouth. They literally, the saliva would begin to flow freely. And I'm mentioning this to you because there's a very enigmatic passage in the Tarikh al-fattash, which I'd like to draw your attention to as we think about the question of sorcery and and the role that it played in the final days of the Songhai Dynasty of the Askiyas, and the way in which the scribes, who, although they were Muslim, they practiced a form of Islam, or their interpretation of Islam was certainly in dialogue with traditional Songhai animist beliefs that were far older than Islam. So here's this passage. Let's just take a moment and look at it. Now, the jurist Ahmed ibn Muhammad ibn Said went by himself to see the prince. The prince in this case was the Askiya Daud, the Askiya who ruled over the time of great prosperity. When he entered the home of the Askiya, and this man was an Arab man, he found him holding his Friday audience according to the regular ceremony. The eunuchs of the Askiya, who numbered around 700, that's a lot of eunuchs, stood at attention behind him, each of them dressed in a garment of silk. Each time that the Askiya wished to clear his throat or to release a jet of saliva, one of the eunuchs hastened towards him, holding out the sleeve of his garment for the prince to spit into. Afterwards, the eunuch wiped the Askiya's mouth to remove any excess mucus. "When I first came in to see you, you surprised me a great deal," the jurist Ahmed said to him, in this case, the Askiya Daud, because what's happened is he comes to meet with the Askiya Daoud, and he walks in on a ceremony in which the Askiya Daoud is spitting, saliva is coming out of his mouth, and his eunuchs are gathering up his spittle as if it's a precious resource. And he seems to be possessed. He seems to be out of his mind, in effect. And this jurist, he's never seen anything like this, and he's very shook up. And so he says, I wondered at first if you were mad, rabid, or deranged when I saw you spitting into the sleeves of these garments as the people poured sand on their heads in your honor. This is what one would do before the Askiya, is to show one's humility, is pour sand on one's head. I am not crazy, the prince, this would be Askiya Daoud, responded with laughter. I have all my powers of reason, but I rule over madmen, the impious and the proud. This is why I act like I am crazy and pretend to be possessed by demons, so that I may frighten them and thereby prevent them from harming the Muslims. Well, this is a really fascinating passage. There's so much going on here. And one of the things I'd like to draw your attention to is the fact that this shows how deliberately, at least in his explanation to his visitor, how deliberately the Askiya Daoud is performing these kinds of rituals to mollify or to assuage or to even pander to his subjects who are more animist in orientation. And but this is not something, again, this is something that is practiced in Songhai. And so if you're coming into the region from outside the region, like let's say from the Arab world, you're just wondering what in the heck is going on. And that's what this man is wondering. But it shows you that unlike we could say the Shi Ali was only nominally a Muslim and was really more affiliated with animist culture. But in this case, the Askiya Daoud he's really playing it both ways. And I think this is an interesting point to observe. And his father, the Askiya Muhammad, did the same thing, is that to consolidate the empire, he had two kinds of subjects that he had to work with. One, the pious scribes and Muslims of Timbuktu, and then from Gao. Remember, Gao is right next to Koima, which is the Rose Dunes, and is a lot of sorcerers in that area, and that's true even today. And so he had to satisfy both constituencies, and so he claims anyway that he was not really possessed. He was only pretending to be possessed to assuage his subjects who were more involved in sorcery, so that they would not harm the Muslims, he said, so to frighten them, so that they would see that he was a man of occult power as well. Now that's a very politically shrewd move on his part, if it's true that he was really only assuaging those who were animist. But I think it's important to note, when you read the Tarikh al-Sudan that John Hunwick translated, you see another incident where Daoud is deliberately participating in an act of sorcery in which he is involved in a conjuration ritual in which a bowl of water, a basin of water is with a calabash inside of it is set, and then one conjures. In this case, is the Askiya Daoud and the sorcerers he's with are said to conjure one of his rivals, effectively a brother of his, who lives, say, some 100 miles away or 100 meters away, I can't remember which, and conjures his double through evoking, through the power of the voice and the pounding on the calabash. And then once the double appears, which would be like a shadow image of his brother, they shackle the double and then drive a spear through its heart. And then the Tarikh al-Sudan states that the brother of the Askiya Daoud is said to have died at that moment, even though he lived some distance away, because his double had been killed in this diabolical ceremony that was a matter of sorcery and witchcraft. So there's a case of the Askiya Daoud participating in sorcery and doing it apparently in earnest. And here he claims anyway to his friend that he's only pretending to do this in order to frighten those who may bring harm to the Muslims. Now, another point I'd like to observe is that that is the case of what, when we talk about the spittle, we have to think about what it really is in effect. Now, remember, the Songhai word for word is naxamala, the Mande word is nyama, the Egyptian is heka. And I have an essay on this entitled Nyama and Heka, African Concepts of the Word at Comparative Literature Studies, published in 2006. But you can very easily access it if you go to my Cedar, if you just Google this name, this title, Nyama and Heka, African Concepts of the Words, and it's on my Western Washington selected works page, and it'll bring the PDF right up, and you can read it. So I don't have time here to go into much detail on this, but you can go and read further about this. But the short version of this is that these Egypto-African concepts of the word, and remember the Songhai or Nilo-Sahelian people, is a concept of the word that is I would call a kind of an occult. It would be an occult materialism. In other words, the word really does exist. There's no transcendental ideal word, as in the logocentric concept of the word in the Platonic tradition, that underwrites the word that appears in the empirical external world. It circulates, and this thinking of the word as a word that circulates in the empirical world, and as such, it consists of wind, the spirit, the breath that issues from our body, from our lungs, out of our mouths, but breath, wind interlaced with the fluids of the body, in this case saliva. And so the saliva, the substance that the Askiya Daoud spits into the sleeves of the eunuchs, is also akin to, let's say, the powerful word of the Askiya Muhammad, who, when he's standing before the Masi, fetish, he utters the profession of faith: there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. But it causes an event to happen, and so it's an interesting instance of an Islamic profession of faith, but that becomes an act of magic due to the power of his word. And there are many other instances in the Tarikh when the Askiya Muhammad speaks, because he is a man of power, his words are dangerous in and of themselves, and so the words become like a kind of a fetish object, in the sense that they are alphabetic, in the sense that his words that he speaks are sounds that have a signifying function, in the sense that they are signs or a thing that points to something else that exists in the real world. But at the same time, they're powerful objects in and of themselves. And so it's a very literal thinking of the word. And I want you to bear that in mind as we look at how Kati describes what happens to the Songhay dynasty of the Askiyas, and how there's a suggestion that the dynasty falls due to a diabolical act of witchcraft that is committed by one of the talibs of Mahmud Kati. And so let's take a look at this. This is attached to one of the chapters towards the conclusion that's describing the unraveling of the dynasty. It's included as a complementary note. So let's read it. It is said that a dispute arose between the Kabara Farma Alu, who was a eunuch, kind of a mean-spirited eunuch, and one of the ulamas on the subject of a field of rice that the Askiya had given as a gift to this sheikh, a field situated in the province of Yuna. Now, the sheikh in question is Al-Hajj Mahmud Kati himself. So the Askiya gave to him a field of rice, and this eunuch, the Kabara Farma Alu, tried to confiscate the field. So let's read what happens. The Kabara Farma Alu had come with the intention of depriving the sheikh, Mahmud Kati, the author of this text, or at least the first part of it, of the use of this field, claiming that it belonged within royal dominion and that the sheikh had not made use of it. He also claimed that Kati had not made use of it. He also claimed that the terrain in question had belonged to the man who was invested with the powers of the Kabara farmer, which would be himself, who farmed it on behalf of the royal house of the Askiya. So essentially, this eunuch, Alu, is trying to steal the field that belonged to Mahmud Kati. So the Kabar farmer Alu had a heated discussion with the sheikh, or with Kati. Again, remember, the main author of the Tarikh al-fattash, concerning this field, and ended by hitting the sheikh with his fist and knocking him to the ground. So this eunuch now has hit Kati and knocked him to the ground with his fist. It was a grave matter. One of the talibs, that is to say, one of the sheikh's disciples, Kati's disciples, happened to be with him at this incident. After the departure of the Kabara farmer, he said this to his master. And this is the talib speaking, who's very angry. If God the Most High had not said in his book, the Quran, whoever so deliberately kills a believer will be punished by hellfire, I would have killed this Kabara farmer today, even without the use of a sword or a spear. But the sheikh, and this is Kati himself, said to him in response, God said, whosoever kills a believer. God did not say, whosoever kills the impious. And then the talib cries out, may the Kabara farmer die then. All right, so it's interesting. So Kati must be pretty angry himself. He's saying, look, that surah in the Quran doesn't apply to this eunuch. And then the talib says, okay, let him die then. Well, what do? So the talib then takes out a sheet of paper on which he wrote something and marked it with certain letters. Next, he folded this paper and sewed it inside a piece of black cloth that he attached to the neck of a goat. After doing this, he took a lance and buried it into the breast of the goat, who fell dead. A year later, on the very day that the talib had killed the goat with his lance, God caused the Kabara farmer to die in the exact same manner, since he was stabbed in the breast by the Balama Siddiq. So it is clear that the Kabara farmer died by divine means. All right, very interesting. So a lot going on here. First of all, this is an act of sorcery. And he writes something on a piece of paper. He folds up the paper, puts it inside a piece of black cloth, and then buries it into the breast of a goat, and thinks that this is going to have a magical effect in the real world. And so he's deliberately performing an act of sorcery, and with Kati's approval. And at the same time, this tells us something about how the scribes, including Kati, thought about writing. Writing, like the divine, let's say, or the occult spittle, I should say, of the Askiyas, that there's something in the writing itself, that there is an occult power or energy, a force in the actual inscription. Okay, now the Franco-Algerian critic Derrida is going to say that liquid is the essence of the pharmacon. So whether we're talking about speaking, which has the fluids of the body imbued in it, or writing, which is like the ink made up of water, that there's a liquid element involved, and this liquid element is a magical property in the way that it's being described in this text. And so we could think then of writing itself, think of the Tarikh al-fattash itself as something that is significant, again, not just for what it says, but for what it is. And writing in this sense is in effect an act of power. So this is not historiography as we normally think of it. We're getting a history, but it's also construed as an act of power. And this is something that I think is worth reflecting upon. So that even the very scriptures of Timbuktu the manuscripts are significant, again, not just for what they say, but they become talismans in themselves, or they become fetishes in themselves, occult objects in themselves. for what they are. Okay. Now, again, here you can see instances of Nyama or Naxamal, the Songhai, and I showed you this. If you saw the lecture on Sahelian Scripture, we discussed this, but how this kind of writing, these are charms or amulets that are powerful fetish objects that can perform a powerful function in the world. For instance, to protect one if one has these amulets, if one is armed with amulets, and griots will arm themselves with these kinds of fetish amulets. Again, you see the man at the bottom drinking the liquid out. So in this case, a marabout would inscribe something on a paper, it would be poured into the water, and then one would drink it, and the fluid would enter the body itself. So these are very different ways of thinking about words, and so that we need to bear this in mind as we read this history. Okay, so now we get this story about how that it's almost then like a domino effect, at least in the way that it's being told to us. That it starts with this incident in the field with Kati and this eunuch Alu, and then this is going to be like one thing after another, like a domino effect after this conflict takes place. Now, part of the problem is we're going to see here is that this eunuch Alu has a very close relation, who is a bully and causes trouble, is a close personal friend with the Askiya, who in this case is the Askiya Muhammad Bani, as we'll see. So let's read. The Askiya Muhammad Bani, son of the Askiya Daud, this is one of the Askiya Daud son, revolted against his brother Askiya al-Hajj and dethroned him. This is also because al-Hajj was sick. Then he proclaimed himself king or sovereign in the year 955 of the Islamic calendar. This would be in the Common Era, December 12th, 1586, January 10th, 1587, exiling al-Hajj to Tondibi. The Askiya al-Hajj was already weakened from an incurable illness, and he died not long after he was dethroned. Muhammad Bani remained in power for 1 year, 4 months, and 8 days. Muslims suffered a great deal because of him due to their friendship for his brother, the Balama Sadiq, but God soon relieved the Muslims of this man. All right, so he's saying here in effect that the Muslim scribes of Timbuktu didn't really like the Askiya Muhammad Bani. They really liked his younger brother, the Balama Sadiq. They lined up behind him, and at first they were going to join him in his revolt against his brother. But we'll see. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. We'll see what happens. We will now reveal the motive that finally led to the deadly war that broke out between the Askiya Muhammad Bani, son of the Askiya Daud, and his brother, the Balama Sadiq. So we've seen what happened in this conflict with Kati and Alu. Now we're going to discuss this other conflict that takes place with the same eunuch that leads to this civil war. This war, we're told, was the cause for the ruin of the Songhai, for it opened the door to internal conflicts, leading to the diminishment of royal power and severing the cord that held together the mechanisms of government. All of this happened at the same time as the invasion from Marrakesh, precipitating the march of events that led to the final downfall of the Songhai. We are going to reveal here its true cause as documented from the notes of one of the most distinguished sheikhs in the land. This would be Ibn al-Mukhtar, speaking of his grandfather, the distinguished Sheikh Hajj Mahmud Kati, piecing together this history from these notes. Okay, so and there are other authors as well that Ibn al-Mukhtar drew from. It's an abridged compilation of various texts. So in any case, let's look at this history of this conflict and see what happened and how it's being described in the Tarikh. Now, according to Songhai custom, the Kabara farmer was a servant of the Askiya and an official of the governing administration of Kabara. At the same time, Kabara was the residence of the Balama and the seat of his command. The Kabar farmer was responsible for the port and the embarkation of travelers, overseeing their comings and goings, whereas the Balama was commander of the local army. Each of them therefore performed his own unique function. At this time, the Kabar farmer was Alu. Now we've already seen he was the one who pushed Kati down and tried to steal his land from him. A eunuch who was evil, obese, and dishonest. He was an ignorant official who was arrogant and mule-headed. So again, remember, like in the case of the Askiya Musa, the scribes have a certain power, and this power gives us, in their descriptions, we certainly get a very loathsome image of this eunuch, Alu, who was the Kabar farmer and was a close friend of the Askiya Muhammad Bani, but was not liked widely by others in Timbuktu. Now there was a panya. This is like a roll of cloth for making dresses and clothes and so on, that had been stolen from one of his servants, of the eunuch's servants, named Songhay, and a servant of the Balama was accused of this theft. The Kabar farmer, or the eunuch, having had wind of these rumblings, sent an envoy to the Balama Sadiq, who was charged to inform him that one of his young slaves had stolen a panya that had belonged to a servant of the Kabar farmer, and that he was to take the panya from the hands of the slave, or to send this slave to the Kabar farmer so that he himself could see to recovering it. When the Balama asked his slave about this missing object, the slave swore that he had never seen it with his own eyes, much less stolen it from anyone. So this is very, this eunuch is being a bully. He's very arrogant, and here he has the audacity to speak to a potential heir to the throne, the younger brother of the Askiya Muhammad Bani, with total contempt, and he can do this because he's chums with the current Askiya, and he accuses him. He says, you better send me the slave. Well, he's already offended the Balama Sadiq's honor, and then the slave of the Balama says, I don't know what he's talking about, and the Balama believes his slave. He does not believe the eunuch. He thinks the eunuch, the Kabar farmer, is just trying to stir up trouble, which he apparently has a penchant for doing. The Kabar farmer claimed that he did not believe the sincerity of the slave's denials, and he would therefore come to find it himself, his intention being to torture the slave until he gave back the panya. But the Balama formally refused this request. As a result, a heated argument broke out between these two officials, who exchanged messages which were filled with insults and ugly words. So we've already seen the Kabar farmer Alu, the eunuch, get into an ugly exchange with Kati, and now, an old man, and now he's in this ugly exchange with the Balama Sadiq. But the Balama Sadiq is not an old, feeble man like Muhammad Kati. He's a full-grown man who's very valiant warrior. In the end, the Kabar farmer carried out a plot to abduct the slave who had been accused of theft. So now he's resorting to treachery. The envoys of the Kabar farmer forcibly carried him away and brought him to stand before the Kabar farmer. The Kabar farmer ordered the slave to be given 100 lashes with a bullwhip and to be placed in irons and thrown into prison. All right, so now he's done it. The Balama wouldn't turn over the slave, so the eunuch just went and got him himself, gave him 100 lashes with the whip, and threw him in prison. Now, when the Balama, and this really offends the Balama's dignity, when the Balama learned what had happened, he sprinted on foot to the house of the Kabar farmer, accompanied by young people from his house, holding a great spear in his hand. It was noon when he entered the house of the Kabar farmer. He fell immediately upon the Kabar farmer, who rose up on his feet. The Balama seized him, hit him in the face, and threw him to the ground. He planted the great spear into him directly under the armpit and pierced his heart. The Kabar farmer, or the eunuch, fell dead. Now here we have it. Exactly a year later, the eunuch dies in the same way that the goat died that was killed in this act of sorcery by Kati's Talib. And so the implication here is that Kati and his Talib themselves, as the writer of this very history, lit the fuse that started this fire. It's a very interesting situation that is being described here. Now, all of this action is taking place in Timbuktu. Remember that, because the Askiya Muhammad Bani is up the river in Gao. Remember, it's about a 2-day trip by pirogue or pinas between Timbuktu and Gao, and that's in those times with the favorable wind. In modern times, people do this with a motor, but it's not that far. But these events are happening in two different areas, and so there's always this question of time lag in terms of communication about what is taking place. Okay, the Balama, now that he's killed the eunuch who was close to his brother, the Askiya, is afraid he's going to be punished. He says the Balama feared that he would be punished for his act by the Askiya, so he dispatched an envoy to his brother, the Kanfari Salah, the son of the Askiya Daoud, who happened to be at Tindirma, to inform him of what he had done and to let him know that he was now in revolt against the Askiya Muhammad Bani, and he disavowed his oath of obedience to the Askiya Muhammad Bani. All right, let's pause there. Again, oaths, vows. Remember, we said in the last lecture the question of adultery is about vow breaking, and so he had sworn an oath, the Balama Sadiq, to his brother, the Askiya Muhammad Bani, and now he says, I'm breaking my oath. So he's active in adultery is one way of saying this, and he wants to now rise up against his brother because he knows that his brother is probably going to punish him severely for having killed this eunuch with whom he had a close relationship. So he goes to his brother. Now the Kanfari Salah is his older brother. And when the Balama goes to his older brother, he basically tells him that you can be king. I don't need to be king myself. You're older than me. You'll be king, and I will obey you if you will join me in fighting our older brother, the Askiya Muhammad Bani. All right. So at the same time, the Balama Sadiq entreated his brother, the Kanfari, to come to meet him with his army and his militia, so that they could make a pact to march together against the Askiya Muhammad Bani, the son of the Askiya Daoud, and depose him. And when they deposed him, the Kanfari Salah would then be invested with the powers of the Askiya and would become king. He could then confer his current powers as Kanfari upon him. So in effect, think of it this way. You've got the Askiya, and then below him you have the Kanfari Salah, and below him you have the Balama. So the two brothers, the Kanfari Salah and the Balama Sadiq, will kill Askiya Muhammad Bani, defeat him in battle, and then the Kanfari Salah, the older brother whom the Balama is appealing to after having killed the eunuch, will become Askiya, and then he will be promoted. The Balama will be promoted to Kanfari himself. So that we have a conspiracy in the making. We have two brothers coming together to form a political conspiracy to depose their older brother, the Askiya Muhammad Bani. So the situation of civil war, fratricidal war between brothers, is now developing. Now the Kanfari Salah accepted the proposition with joy and gladness. He likes the idea of being Askiya. He thinks it's a great idea. He assembled his forces, and followed by the Barakoi and the Dermakoi, he set out at the head of an imposing army. A blacksmith named Muhammad Benate is reputed to have said, I counted to the man the cavaliers who departed with him, or the men on horses. There were 4,600. So 4,600 men on horses. As for the foot soldiers, there were so many of them, it was impossible for me to count them or calculate the number. So a lot of big army now being gathered together to go attack the Askiya Muhammad Bani. Traveling towards Kabara to join the Balama Sadiq, they stopped at Toya, where the Kanfari awaited the arrival of the Balama, who presented himself before him. After finding themselves in agreement, they drew up a plan to march on Gao with the goal of deposing their brother, Muhammad Bani. So these two brothers are conspiring. They've made their plans. They're leaving Timbuktu, and they're marching towards Gao now, and they're gonna have a coup d'etat essentially against their older brother, Muhammad Bani. But then things start to unravel in this the conspiracy, the budding conspiracy between the Kanfari Salah and the Balama Sadiq is starting to, already before it's even began, there is a rupture which causes more upheaval. Says, and here, let's read about it. It says, but after the Balama had returned to his house to prepare this meal, a certain slanderer came in his absence to find his brother, the Kanfari Salah, and to make false accusations against him, the Balama, claiming that the Balama had actually betrayed Salah and was seeking to kill him. The Kanfari Salah believed these insinuations, and as he was a rash man, he immediately ordered his horse to be saddled. Without weighing the evidence, he climbed upon his steed, calling out 40 of his bravest cavaliers from his army and ordering them to accompany him on horseback. He did not inform any of them in any other way of the true reason for his departure. So he doesn't sound like he's very bright, that's for sure. He's not a shrewd politician. He just jumps on his horse after hearing this slanderer say bad things about the Balama, but he believes these bad things, and we don't know the circumstances. Maybe he had reason to believe them, but we're told by the author of the Tarikh, anyway, that he was a rash man. So he just immediately takes off to find his brother with the intention of killing him. He set off with firmness and resolution, armed from head to toe and consumed with violent anger. He did not stop until he reached the door of the palace of the Balama. The Kanfari overtook him as he passed through the door and threw a spear at him. It is God that we have come from, the Balama cried out, and it is to him that we will return. There is strength and power only in God, the Most High and Most Great. Why then do you act this way? What is the meaning of this? Have you succumbed to the words of slanderers and wish that our enemies rejoice at the evil that will befall us? Then the Balama Sadiq began to cry. So in the fuller description, he's making food for his men. He's preparing. He's in the kitchen making things, and suddenly, his brother just barges through on horseback and throws a spear at him. He's, what in the world is going on? But he jumps on a horse and starts to flee. As for the Kanfari, he threw another spear at the Balama, which missed its mark and did not pierce him. He threw a third spear at him, which landed in the Balama's saddle. So now we've got a horseback. They're riding on horseback. One brother chasing the other. The Kanfari throwing spears at the Balama. The Balama spurred on his horse as if he wished to take flight, but then he came back upon the Kanfari and hurled a spear at him, which landed between his two shoulders and came out through his chest. So the Balama was a pretty fierce warrior, apparently. And after running for a while, he finally just stopped, turned around, and then he stopped, and then he threw a spear at his brother. He killed him. And so now it's just the Balama, the same man who killed the eunuch, has now killed his older brother. He's got two deaths on his hands, and he's not very happy about this. He didn't mind killing the eunuch, but it wasn't part of his plan, apparently, to kill his older brother. The Balama, and we're told that the Balama accompanied the funeral procession until Timbuktu. We're told that he wept. Then he gave a pious alms so that the Quran might be recited over the deceased, ordered a large number of cows to be slaughtered, and gave to the talibs who had recited the Quran over the body a gift of 10 slaves and 100 cowries. So he gives full funeral rites to his brother, but the Balama is the head of this army, which is going to march towards the Askiya Muhammad Bani. So now we have just two brothers that are coming into conflict with one another, as the Kanfari Salah is now dead. Okay. The Balama, after burying his brother, the Kanfari Salah, occupied himself making plans for his rebellion. The companions of the deceased Kanfari and his soldiers joined with them. So now both armies have come together. They beat the drum in his honor, proclaiming him king and bestowing the title of Askiya upon him. So now we have two Askiyas. The Balama is one of the Askiyas, and his brother, the Askiya Muhammad Bani, is Askiya, and these two forces are going to come into collision. He set off with his numerous partisans, who altogether formed an enormous army of more than 6,000 men. However, the Askiya Muhammad Bani remained in his palace, this is in Gao, while his spies came and went, keeping him abreast of these events. He decided to leave his capital so that he could march against the Balama before he arrived at Gao. Okay, so now the Askiya Muhammad Bani is going to leave his palace and meet his brother, the Balama, on the field of battle to protect his status as sovereign and to protect Gao itself. He doesn't want the Balama to get to Gao. And so now you got two armies marching straight for each other, and civil war is a fratricidal civil war is happening. It's total disaster. But now the Askiya Muhammad Bani had one thing in common with the eunuch Alu, and that's that both of them were apparently quite obese. And this, we're going to see, leads to an interesting situation. Now here is outside of Gao. These are the rose dunes of Koima. This is where the Askiya Muhammad was banished to by his son, the Askiya Musa. And this just gives you a little glimpse of what Gao looks like. But the Askiya Muhammad Bani marches from Gao towards his brother, who's coming from Timbuktu. These two forces are going to collide on the field of battle, or so it seems. Now, the Askiya Muhammad Bani was a man of great corpulence who was both obese and pot-bellied. And he needed to stop as early as the noon hour. So he doesn't march very far. He's pretty self-indulgent and can't move quite as fast as his more athletic younger brother, the Balama. A tent was built for him with unfurled carpets as the army set up its camp. When the Askiya Muhammad Bani descended from his horse, he ordered that fresh water be brought to him, which was poured within a large basin that he used to wash himself. Then he dropped down upon his bed, where he stretched out without getting undressed and fell asleep. As the time of Dohor approached, his young eunuchs arrived. They tried to help him, but he did not budge. When they closely examined him, they saw that he was dead. All right, so it appears that he was so out of shape that he just marched himself to death, literally. It's possible somebody could have poisoned him, but we're not told that. That's conjecture on my part. It could have just been that he was so badly out of shape and obese that his exhaustion from the march literally killed him. But now you've got a totally chaotic situation. The Askiya is dead. You've got the Askiya, the Balama, who has been proclaimed Askiya, who killed his other brother, killed the eunuch, and now there's no Askiya at the head of this other army. But of course, the Balama knows nothing of any of these events. In fact, nobody does, because the notables, who are the advisors of the Askiya Muhammad Bani, keep it to themselves. They keep quiet about it, and they don't disclose the fact that the Askiya Muhammad Bani is dead, and they gather together to discuss what they should do, and they end up choosing one of the brothers. Remember, there are many, many brothers now, because the Askiya Musa and the Askiya Muhammad had many children and many sons. And they deliberate, and they choose the one brother that they think would make the best Askiya, and then they summon him. So let's see what happens. Those notables, this would be the nobility, the higher caste, like the Wakuri, the Wangara, and so on, who knew of this death, were strongly perplexed. They held council to consider what resolutions and lines of conduct they should adopt. Finally, they agreed that it would be wise to proclaim as their king the Kanfari Muhammad, who was the son of the Askiya Ismail, the son of the Askiya Muhammad, who happened to be the senior and eldest of the candidates to the throne. So this is the direct grandson of the Askiya Muhammad through the Askiya Muhammad's son, Ismail. He was set for in a palace at a place nearby where he was encamped, having been informed that the Askiya required his presence. He responded immediately to the summons, arriving before those who had asked for him, whom he found in the tent of the Askiya. So that the notables trick him. They tell him that the Askiya wants him to come. He has no idea what's happening, And then when they get there, they basically tell him they want him to take the place of his dead brother. They said to him, "O Mahmud, you see the unhappiness which comes down upon us and the hard trial that awaits us all. We believe that this day will be the last day of the dynasty of the Songhai and will mark the date of its ultimate destruction. You have seen that the Balama Sadiq has killed his brother, the Kanfari Salah, that he also killed the Kabara Farma Alu, or the eunuch, and that he has raised an army to attack Muhammad Bani. You know very well that out of all of the sons of their common father, those who are here now, not a single one of them wants to give up power to one of his brothers. God has sown hatred and enmity between them to such a degree that not one of them would hesitate to use force to kill his brother in order to secure the throne for himself." So we see the situation. It is fratricidal, brother killing brother, hatred among them. But this one man is a man they seem to trust out of all the sons of the Askiyas. For our part, we agree only that it is you and no one other than you whom we are willing to support due to your firmness and patience, as well as your handsome administrative talents. In addition to these qualities, you are the oldest and most experienced of your brothers. We advise that you become invested with royal powers right away before the others learn of the death of the Askiya. As for the sons of the Askiya, Daud and his grandsons, we will never accept any of them as rulers over us because of their wickedness, cruelty, and disregard for the ties of blood. Okay, so this is it's yet another conspiracy, as the other sons of the Askiya are left in the dark, and the notables are going to appoint this particular son to be Askiya. But let's note what their concerns are. Is that they say, well, look, you're the oldest and you have good administrative talents, but there's also these other issues that the other sons of the Askiyas and grandsons, they're wicked, they're cruel, but they also disregard ties of blood nobility. This is the same theme. This is an overlap of the themes that you find in the epic of the Askiya Muhammad, the griot version. This is the principal criticism of the griots of this generation of Askiyas, is that they don't think about questions of nobility. They don't care. And the way this is depicted in the Askiya epic of Askiya Muhammad is that the last Askiya, who's a kind of a composite of all these other Askiyas named Sumalakasa, he doesn't marry, but he has a concubine essentially who was a slave who has a son, and she becomes his favorite. And then the son of the slave becomes his favorite son, and he just doesn't even care about questions of blood nobility. And this is what the griots fault the Askiyas with. But here we find the scribes also faulting the sons of the Askiya as well, not only for being wicked and cruel, but because they don't respect the traditional caste system, the ties of blood. So there you can see would be Sarma, Songhai griots who would perform it. It's a little bit different. They perform on a molo rather than the Mande kora, the way the Sundiata Keita epic is performed on a kora. And the kora version is a bit more melodic. This is a more harsh sound. The molo also, you may, just to note in passing, is where the banjo comes from. It's very similar. It has an animal skin stretched over it. After the partisans of Mahmud had made their pact, they first sent a eunuch named Tabakali to Ishaq, one of the other sons of the Askiyas, commanding him to say that to Ishaq that the Askiya Muhammad Bani requested his presence. So it's the same trick. Now they're going to tell him that the Askiya is still alive and he wants to see Ishaq, who's one of the brothers, also wants to be Askiya himself. But this slave, Tabakali, then went to see Ishaq, whom he found seated on his prayer rug. Once there, however, he took him aside and secretly communicated to him the news of the death of the Askiya Muhammad Bani. So now we have another treacherous eunuch, and he's telling Ishaq, he says that your brother is dead. This is a trap of some sort. And indeed it is, because the notables were planning on killing him if he had shown up. He also described to him the views of the courtiers toward him and the real reason why they summoned him, which was to kill him, in effect, revealing to him their secret thoughts and urging him to beware. So he's now been, Ishaq is aware of what's happening. So we have more chaos brewing. Ishaq summoned his brothers and his friends, as well as the sons of his brothers and the sons of his sisters, and told them what had happened, describing the inclinations of the court towards them, including the court's decisions and secret plans. Then he mounted his steed. At the same time, approximately 100 of his relatives mounted their horses, their arms fastened to their shields. The assembly of courtiers only learned of their coming by the sand that their horses kicked up. They surrounded the tent of the Askiya, where the courtiers were assembled before the body of Muhammad Bani, making a ring around it. Ishaq then said to them, "We know what has happened. We have heard that you have plotted against us out of hatred and hostility." So now the notables with the would-be Askiya inside are completely surrounded by Ishaq and his men. It's an interesting moment. And in doing so, Ishaq is going to ascend to power himself and become Askiya, in addition to saving his own life. The Balama Siddiq had no knowledge of the death of Muhammad Bani, nor of the ascension of Ishaq. So while this crazy incident is happening, and Ishaq rises to power after telling, because all of the notables bend the knee to him now, and he spares them. He lets them live, but they now have to swear allegiance to him, and now Ishaq becomes crowned as the Askiya. Even his brother, who was going to become the Askiya, if the notables had gotten their way, swears his loyalty to Ishaq, and consequently Ishaq lets them live. But now it's Ishaq who is the Askiya, and so we still have the same situation of two armies colliding, but now it's no longer led by Muhammad Bani. It's led by the Askiya Ishaq after all of this chaos. So the Balama, is coming towards Gao, but he found himself in the desert with his army marching towards the capital, truly believing that he could win the hearts of the inhabitants of Gao as well as their affection. He was very popular, and the scribes certainly liked him. In this way, he believed he would increase the support already given to him by his partisans. He firmly believed that he alone would emerge victorious. All of a sudden, however, he was attacked by 400 young cavaliers. These horsemen were princes from the family of the Askiya and others who were incomparably elegant. They were all adorned in their traditional hats, and they galloped straight towards him. So he doesn't know what's happened, and he thinks everybody's going to join his side. And he sees 400 men on horseback, galloping towards him. And when the Balama and his entourage first saw these horsemen, everyone felt a great joy, supposing that these cavaliers had come to make their submission to the Balama after having revolted against Muhammad Bani. So they think that they're gonna be on their side. But when these cavaliers arrived at closer proximity to the army of the Balama, they jumped off their horses and, holding themselves at attention, saluted the Balama, saying, "Tunkara, Tunkara, O Balama, Tunkara, Tunkara. The Askiya Ishaq, your brother, salutes you and wishes to inform you that God has summoned your brother, the Askiya Muhammad Bani, by afflicting him yesterday with a sudden and unexpected death. Now God has given the palace of his father to Ishaq. All the people of Songhai have chosen him as their king, and he has been elevated to the throne with the permission of God." Well, this was not what the Balama and his men were expecting. They don't even know what to think about this. This seems really out of the blue. So now there's total confusion about what's happened. Should they go? Should they continue into battle? Should they submit to the Askiya Ishaq? Nobody. It's just complete confusion. But the men of the Askiya Ishaq say, "All those who submit to him will find only favors, affection, and goodwill." However, all those who rebel against him are in rebellion against the orders of God and in disobedience against God. Those who disobey God's orders will bring misfortune and punishment upon themselves. It was then, we're told, that dread, fear, and terror seized the hearts of the soldiers of the Balama Sadiq. There's too much confusion, and now they're filled with dread and terror. But the Balama has not, he's still determined. He still orders the drum to be beaten and for his men to break camp and mount their horses to ride and meet Ishaq, attacking his partisans in spite of the many warnings of the 400 cavaliers whom the prince had sent. Then the Balama Sadiq himself mounted his horse along with his companions, but they were themselves now sick at heart, having reached the far limits of dejection and discouragement, so that they're completely demoralized. His soldiers, this was not what they expected. They don't even know what to make of all of this. But the Balama is determined. He's going to go into battle anyway, in spite of the dejected nature of his own army, and it's a total disaster. The Balama and his men are destroyed, and there's even descriptions of how the followers of the Askiya Ishaq, they liked the Balama. As I said, he was very popular and charismatic, and they when he finally had to flee the battlefield, they were supposed to kill him, but they didn't even want to kill him, so they only pretended to, just so he could get away. They just wanted him to go away, but they didn't have the heart to kill him. And then what happened finally is that he did get away, and he disappeared. It was a very touching scene where he says goodbye to his son and his wife, and he goes into the wilderness, and he's never heard from again. He probably was killed. But that's the end of the Balama Sadiq, and now you have the reign of the Askiya Ishaq. But the reign of the Askiya Ishaq is going to be very short-lived. Remember, again, the Moroccans all the while are watching all of this happen. Okay, so we're told that this civil war marked the beginning of the decline of the Songhay Dynasty, its fall and ruin before the actual coming of the troops of Muli Ahmed al-Dahabi. This is Muli Ahmed Mansour from Marrakesh. The Askiya Ishaq remained in power for 3 years. It was during his reign that the decadence of the Songhai government was first made manifest. So now we get more reasons for the fall. In addition to the civil war, then we get descriptions of the immorality, sexual immorality, adultery, decadence. It's just nobody can believe the words of the officials. It's a total crisis of confidence. Nobody can give credit to the words of the government officials in the Askiya. So people are very demoralized. And Muli Ahmed from Marrakesh is licking his chops. So he sends a slave named Jadar. Now, the Pasha Jadar was a Christian who also was a eunuch. He became a eunuch and then converted to Islam and became a slave of the Pasha of Marrakesh, Muli Ahmed. And so he comes with these Christian renegade Spaniards. They're essentially mercenaries. And they leave for Marrakesh at the end of the year 998, or October 29th, 1590. And it takes them, quite a while, several months, but they finally get to Gao in 990 on Friday, March the 1st, 1591. Now, remember, they have rifles or maybe blunderbusses would be a better way to say it. They have guns in any case. This is not the Songhai don't have this kind of technology, and so even though the Songhai greatly outnumber these renegade Christian Spaniards who served the Muli Ahmed from Marrakesh, they don't have the same firepower, same technology either. And it's very interesting too. You read descriptions of how in the Tarikh how that they speak Spanish and they look totally different. The Songhai have never seen people that look like these renegade Christians look and heard the language that they speak. And so it just increases their confusion. So here's Muli Ahmed al-Mansur. He ruled from or lived from 1549 to 1603. And what we're talking about now is called the Sahelian Conquest of 1590. This is the time in which the Moroccans from the north invaded the south and destroyed the Songhay Dynasty of the Askiyas. None of the companions of the Askiya remained on horseback. This is what I'm just quoting from you here is a description of that encounter with the other, which so stupefies the Songhai when they see these renegades. All of them climbed down from their horses and entered into the circle of the spectators. They sat down, astonished to behold people whose faces differed so much from their own. They were surprised by the Moroccans' extravagant manner of wearing their hair. These Moroccans would have in effect been Spaniards, which made their faces seem speckled, white, and black. They, the Songhai, were overwhelmed with fear, apprehension, and confusion. Now, the right branch of these troops, which was made up of a section from the Andalus, included 500 horsemen. Regarding the number of those present at this battle with the Moroccans, I once heard a man of high repute say that the Askiya led 1,800 warriors on horseback, including the Kanfari, the Balarma, and the Bengafarma, as well as all of their troops, and that he led another 9,700 foot soldiers, along with the 12 Sunna who carried their standards. These were the flag bearers. Now, so they have a lot more men, but they don't have these powerful weapons that the Spanish Moroccans have. The Moroccans swept down upon the inhabitants, heaping injuries and threats and blows upon them and compelling them to empty their houses through the use of force and violence. Now, this is after Gao was destroyed. This is a description of the Moroccans' entry into Timbuktu when they just treat people so brutally. They divided the houses between themselves, the houses of the people of Timbuktu, entering them at the same time that the owners were expelled. The Moroccans set to work, joining the houses and the roads into one enclosure and demolishing a portion of the buildings. Nothing so frightening or cruel had ever happened to the people of Timbuktu. Never before had they known anything more bitter. It is beyond our powers to fully describe all of the misery and losses that were suffered at Timbuktu when the Moroccans took possession or took occupation of this town. It is beyond our powers to tell the tale of all the violent and excessive acts. Now, I'm only going to read a few of them here, but there are, it was very pitiful what happened and how cruelly the Moroccans treated the people of Gao and Timbuktu. And I think this is important to bear in mind in light of what is going on today in Mali, when you have, Algerian and Libyan Arab peoples that have invaded Mali. Once again, there's a real sense in which history is repeating itself today. They were committed to these crimes that were committed within these walls. The Moroccans even tore off the doors of the houses, cut down the town's trees in order to build a boat, which once constructed, they dragged from Timbuktu to the river. Afterwards, a long, heavy chain that the Moroccans had with them was brought out and attached to the neck of the prisoners. This single chain served to bind them all, with the exception of the Askiya, who alone was neither chained nor pinioned nor put into irons. A carpet was even laid out for him in the tents where he was held, but he was placed under the watch of guards and their supervisors. The Askiya was separated from his men so he could not communicate with them. So they've imprisoned. They caught the Askiya. They caught his men. They've put them all in irons. Only the Askiya is they've left not put in irons. But he's totally isolated. It's a disaster. It's an utter disaster. The Askiya, we're told that the Askiya Ishaq and his men were held in prison at Gao for around a month, after which a very deep and wide pit was dug out inside the house where they were detained. Then every single one of them was killed, after which their bodies were tossed into this pit, and dirt was thrown over them. God have mercy upon them. So they were all slaughtered, and it is the end of the dynasty. The Askiya Ishaq's death marks the end of the Songhay dynasty of the Askiyas. It's very sad. Now, there's a very prominent historian who lives in Timbuktu. His name is Al-Hajj Salim Wald. I had a chance to meet with him a number of years ago. In the preface or the introduction to the Tarikh al-fattash, I described my meeting with him and some of the things that he said when he gave his expertise on this topic of why the dynasty imploded. So let me read to you what he said, what his view was. He's a very interesting and important figure who as of this lecture recording, is still alive in Timbuktu. Very old now, though. Here's his view. He said, the biggest mistake that the Askiyas made was in not investing in firearms. They ignored the development of superior military armaments in the north. They could very well have brought rifles. This would have been easy for them. Kano brought rifles from the Turks. This is where, in the Sokoto area, the Grand Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. The Askiyas could have done the same, he said. The Askiyas had many interactions with the Turks, both at Mecca and elsewhere. While the Moroccans stockpiled up on powerful weapons, the Songhai rulers sat around and did nothing. They did not believe it was necessary to make the investment in the new technology, and so they were easily defeated when the army from the north swooped down upon them. Now, this is very interesting because this is very similar also to what happened in 2012 when Libyan Arabs swooped down from the north once again with all of the weapons that had belonged to the stockpiles of armaments that had belonged to Muammar Gaddafi, who was killed, and the Malians couldn't defend the north because their weapons were nowhere near as powerful as the weapons of the Libyans, and part of the reason why was because the Bamako government in the south had embezzled a lot of the funds that, like, the Americans gave, a lot of money to the Malians to protect the north, but that money just simply disappeared in Bamako, and so they were weak and they couldn't defend the north, and so the same thing happened. According to Al-Hajj Salim Wald, the same thing happened this time. They just, smaller army, but much more powerful in terms of its technology. Now, here is what Ibn al-Mukhtar in the Tarikh al-fattash says. He has a more more pious, not historical or political, but spiritual view on this question. He says, what caused the ruin of the Songhai, or the state of Songhai, and compelled God to throw it into disorder? What brought divine punishment upon its citizens, which they had mocked up until this point, was their failure to observe the laws of God, the inequity of the slaves, as well as the pride and arrogance of the great ones. At the time of Ishaq, the Askiya Ishaq, the town of Gao had reached the extreme limits of immorality. The most grave crimes and most disagreeable acts against God were overtly committed there. The worst forms of baseness were commonly displayed both far and wide. Things had reached such a point that an officer of adultery was formally appointed. A special drum was made for this official, before whom those interested were reciprocally summoned. There were many other things that cannot be mentioned here because of the dishonor it would bring on those who had the audacity to commit such actions. We belong to God. It is to Him that we should return. And so it was immorality, adultery, according to the author of the Tarikh in this case, that caused the empire to implode. And so it was attacked from the outside. This was an imperialistic venture of the Moroccans, but it could only happen in this account because the Songhai themselves had weakened the empire by their own immorality and their fratricidal, conflicts that developed from within it. And so this is an interesting lesson too, to reflect upon. And I think, Wald, when I met with him, he said to me, and I think he's right. It wasn't just one reason. There are a lot of reasons. And so I think both Wald and the author of the Tarikh are right. These are all reasons why it began to collapse from within. Now here's an image of Ahmed Baba. He was a very important scholar and jurist, very famous throughout all of Northwest Africa. The Moroccans took him into, they imprisoned him, took him into exile. He lived for some 20 years in Marrakesh, where he amazed people with his knowledge, and won the respect of his captors. And after some 20 years, they allowed him to return to Timbuktu, which he did. And he died there. And today the library is named after him there. He's the author of many, many, many manuscripts, a very interesting person who's mentioned also in the Tarikh al-fattash. Now, after Ahmed Baba and other important Songhai personages were sent into exile, we're told in this period when he was gone for 20 years, Timbuktu became a body without a spirit. Its life was turned upside down. Its conditions of existence changed, as did its customs. The lowest elements of the population became the most elevated, and the most elevated became the lowest. The worst rabble lorded over the nobility. The things of religion were traded for the goods of this world, and faith was swapped for error. The rules of justice were suppressed. Tradition became mere dead letter. New doctrines carried the day, and there was no one left in the town at this time who observed the law or who walked in fear of God, with the sole exception of Muhammad Bagayoko ibn Ahmed. God have mercy upon him. And Muhammad Bagayoko is a really fascinating figure, saintly figure. His grave in Timbuktu is one of the most important graves there. And there are a lot of stories, I won't go into them here, but there are a lot of really interesting stories about him in the Tarikh, of his defiance of the Moroccans. He was truly an outstanding figure. But we're being told here he was the only one who continued to walk in fear of God, and it's truly people were totally demoralized, and it was a sad period in the history of this illustrious city of learning. Before the arrival of the Moroccan expedition, Timbuktu had reached the apex of beauty and splendor, we are told. Religion flourished there, and the prophetic tradition gave life to all things in Timbuktu, in the domain of religion as in temporal affairs. In those days, Timbuktu had no parallel in the lands of the blacks. From the province of Mali to the extreme limits of the lands of the Maghreb, no other town was better known for the solidity of its institutions, for its political liberties, for its unblemished morals, for the security of its citizens and their goods, for its clemency and compassion towards the poor and towards strangers, for its courtesy towards students and men of science, for its assistance towards students and scholars. So he's describing here the good old days, the days of opulence, that it really was wonderful. We're thinking here, for instance, during the time of the Askiya Daoud, that it really was a wonderful period, but now those days are gone. We're told one might come across 100 of its townsfolk who had neither spear nor sword nor knife nor anything other than a staff. Muhammad ibn al-Mulad told me that he had seen in this town 26 houses containing the shops of tailors that are called tindi. Each of these shops was supervised by a chief who had around 50 apprentices. That's quite a lot. And certain patrons employed 70 to 100 apprentices. And this was a place, books were manufactured here, many, many books. There were around 150 schools in Timbuktu, where young boys were taught to read the Quran, or 180 schools, according to the Sheikh Muhammad ibn Ahmed. The same narrator added, "My glance happened to fall on the writing planks of the schoolboys, which were dispersed throughout the courtyard of the house. I counted 123 of these planks, and I realized that the entire Quran was contained on these writing planks. The marvels and splendors of Timbuktu at this time were so great that one could not possibly enumerate them all. Even the most faithful memory would not know how to preserve the record of these things. Later on, God healed the ravages that Timbuktu had suffered during the reign of the Pasha Mahmud. The number of its schoolboys and scholars increased once again because of those who came from the extending lands of Kikuyu through Jenne. So in time, things begin to heal, but it never again reaches its apex or its time of glory. The glory days are gone, never to return ever to this day. Here you can see what some of these boards look like. We discussed this in the lecture on Sahelian Scripture, which you can also learn more about, but how Quranic inscriptions were written on these boards. And this is what he was describing that he saw, in which the entire Quran being laid out in this fashion. Then God distinguished the fires of discourse that had been lit between the indigenous peoples and the Moroccans, as well as the hatred that had divided them. The Moroccans brought no more harm to the people of the land once the fires of revolt had been extinguished, nor did they tolerate further arrests, contenting themselves with ruling through the Askiya and the indigenous chiefs of the land, and with exacting taxes, tithes, and the sales tax on merchandise from the inhabitants. And so this is very similar. The Moroccans are ruling in a very similar way to the way the French did when they colonized this area. And so again, remember we discussed how Yambo Walagam speaks of there's more than one history of imperialism in this part of the world. There's Arab imperialism, from the north, and so even after the brutal era is over, the Moroccans do essentially what the French do in the neo-colonial era. They rule indirectly, and so they appoint leaders and they get taxes, and so it becomes a vassal state. It's no longer an autonomous sovereign state. Here you can see again the Tarikh al-fattash, and if you're interested in this text, I encourage you to read it. It's a wonderful story. It's like a walk through time. It's like going back to a whole different era, and the people that are described in this text are so interesting, and it was certainly a wonderful civilization, and so I do encourage you to read it and learn more about it.